Hi everyone. I'm delighted to be here tonight to launch Places for the Living, Places for the Dead, which is a culmination of many years of archaeological research, excavations and analysis. I myself was a senior archaeologist for Headland Archaeology, as we were then, for much of the fieldwork associated with the project. But of course I was only one of a very large team of archaeologists and engineers who worked hard to make the most of the archaeological opportunities presented by the building of a new road. And I think the book gives a great overview of the fruits of that labour. I was here in New Ross with the archaeological team in 2009 and 10, and again for a stint in 2013. And during that time, we grew to appreciate the rolling fertile landscape with its wide waterways that sits in a part of Ireland that is closest to our nearest neighbours. And so perhaps it was no surprise that we encountered such rich evidence for life and death in the past communities during our work here. The book contains details of 36 sites with archaeological remains that were discovered along the entire length of the route, and they range in date from around 6,000 years ago to the relatively recent past. So tonight I'm just going to barely touch on a few of the key discoveries to give you a flavour of what the book contains. Today, County Wexford is famed for its farm produce, both tillage and dairy, and it is this very landscape that sustains the bounty that was equally attractive to Ireland's first farmers. The first farming communities established themselves in Ireland in the early Neolithic period, just over 5,500 years ago, and they began clearing woodland to create fields for crops and animals, and for the first time this allowed people to become more sedentary and to create more permanent settlements. And in the townland of Ryleen, we found In the townland of Ryleen, we found a really excellent example of such a settlement in the form of a rectangular house. And this house is of a type that is highly characteristic of the early part of the 4th millennium BC. Hopefully you could see here the archaeologists are working on the outline, which is just, you can see stone and dark shadows in the ground. And this represents the foundation trench of a rectangular house measuring about 8.5 metres by 6.2 metres, and had a central dividing wall. And you can see here just a close-up of it's a foundation trench. And about 90 of these houses are known in Ireland, and this was actually the first one found in County Wexford. A similar one was found soon after on the N25 Bypass project. Here we can see an artist's visualisation of what this house might have looked like, with timber uprights set into the foundation trench. And the activities shown here, the people carrying them out, these were hinted at by the finds and materials that we found in association with the house, which included charcoal, charred hazelnuts and charred cereal grains. A total of 142 sherds of a type of pottery called carinated bowl was also found at the site, and this was Ireland's earliest type of pottery. And about 50 stone artefacts were found, including flint tools and a piece of a stone axe. So this discovery really gave us a glimpse into the lives of a farming family in the New Ross area. And carbon-14 dating of charred plant remains told us that the family occupied this house between about 3,700 and 3,600 BC. Next, I want to move on a couple of thousand years to have a look at some of the places the descendants of these first farmers would have chosen for the burial of their dead. During the period known as the Bronze Age, there was dramatic social change throughout Ireland, and it saw the widespread adoption of metallurgy. On the New Ross Bypass scheme, we found a variety of previously unknown Bronze Age sites, dating to between about 2,200 and 800 BC. And there was plenty of evidence for day-to-day life in the form of scattered pits and full fia. But what stands out for this period is the evidence we uncovered for the treatment of the dead. At least 32 burials were identified at 4 sites, and all of these consisted of cremated human remains, and cremation was the normal burial rite for this period in Ireland. In the townland of Camlin, on a site that we called Camlin 3, we found the remains of a single cremation, and this was contained within an upturned ceramic urn that was placed in a small pit in the ground adjacent to a large earth-fast boulder, which may have acted as a natural burial marker. The bone within the cremation was that of an adult male and was radiocarbon dated to the early Bronze Age between about 1940 and 1750 BC. In the townland of Stokestown then, on a site overlooking the River Barrow, a cluster of 3 cremation burials were identified in association with what we think were the remains of a ring ditch, which would have been a kind of a burial monument from the period. And there were 3 different types of burials on this site. One of them was contained in a simple pit, and the pit contained a bipartite vase, which is a type of pottery in use at that time. The other two then were stone-lined kists, and one of them contained a beautifully decorated encrusted urn, you can see with the incised lines and decoration. And the third cyst didn't contain any pottery, just the cremated remains placed directly into it. The three burials were all of adults. One was possibly male, but it wasn't possible to confirm the sex of the other two. And they dated to the early Bronze Age, again between about 1950 and 1695 BC. And the burials at Stokestown were very individualised, and obviously great care was taken over them. And it's likely that this site would have been venerated in the community for some time. The other two sites that contain cremated burials from the Bronze Age were a little later in date. This is just a visualisation of Stokestown, and just imagining how the families might have gathered at the site of the burials and could have revisited over time. So as I said, the other two sites were a bit different. They were both flat cremation cemeteries, and they contained a large number of burials, and they weren't likely in use for a considerable period of time. And they were a bit later than the burials we've just talked about as well. They were more into the Middle Bronze Age period. They both had a number of post and stake holes which could have represent where timber grave markers would have been placed. And interestingly, which is very rare for these type of sites, they both contained evidence for more than one distinct phase of use. So the one that we're looking at here is in the townland of Camlin, located on Camlin Hill. This site contained 5 full and 9 token or partial burials interred within simple pits, plus another 6 pits that contained cremated bone that we couldn't 100% confirm was human, but we highly suspect that it would be. Careful excavation here revealed several phases of activity, with indications that the first phase of burial was sealed by a layer of soil, and later burials were placed in there at different times. So it indicated that people were coming back again and again to this site, and it remained a focal point in the landscape. There was also some evidence of grave goods, which is unusual for this period and these type of flat cemeteries. And the most unusual of these was were little beads made of stone. You see a picture of the two of them there. So they're almost unique in the record and found in a cemetery like this. The other flat cemetery then that we're looking at is in the townland of Berkeley. This contained a sequence of 14 Middle Bronze Age cremation deposits, and 2 of the burials contained sherds of pottery, most likely from collared urns. So it was normal in this period that you wouldn't have a full pot, you would just have maybe sherds of pottery, and also the token burials are partial, just a portion of what we would have expected a full cremated body to contain, and would have been deposited in pits at this time as well. So the number and variety of the Bronze Age burials provided our osteologists with a great deal of data for analysis. For example, extensive analysis has been carried out on the radiocarbon dates from Berkeley and Camlin 3 using cutting-edge methodologies for radiocarbon dating, and this has shed new light on how Middle Bronze Age cemeteries can have very defined stages of use. It was also possible to study things like how the cremation process itself compared in different burials over the course of the Bronze Age. And despite the finely cremated nature of the material, we managed to catch some glimpses of the individuals concerned. For example, at Camlin 3, the adult male there had spinal joint disease, which indicated long-term stress on the spine. Overall, the discovery of these burials gives us a real connection to the Bronze Age communities that inhabited the Lower Barrow Valley. And we can identify with their need to treat the dead with respect and care and create sites which serve as long-term reminders of those who have passed. For the last site I'm going to mention tonight, I want to return to a place for the living and move forward again in time to the late medieval period this time, spanning between the 12th and 16th centuries AD, and following the arrival of the Normans to Ireland and the establishment of a settlement first at Old Ross and then at the town and port of New Ross in the early 13th century. And there's abundant evidence for the impact of the Normans in Wexford. For example, there's a fantastic Norman Way trail, which includes many upstanding sites such as castles and churches around South Wexford. But it is much rarer to find the evidence of the more mundane side of life and find evidence of where the people who were essential to the economy of a manor would have resided. And this is why we were very excited to find the remains of an extensive farmstead in the townland of Landscape. And this had 2 phases of activity, the main one from around the 13th century and a second phase closer to the 17th century. And the site was on the very edge of the manor of Ross, in an area where both native Irish and colonists would have been occupying. And there was a good bit of study into whether the inhabitants here would have been native Irish or colonial. but there's no real conclusion because we have influences from both sides here. The core of the settlement comprised of 5 distinct buildings, as well as various shallow ditches and pathways, which served to enclose but not defend settlements. The main domestic structure, we can see a plan of it here, was identified as a cottage made of clay or cob walls, which also had timber posts in its construction. And this would have housed both people and animals at the time, typical byre type structure. There was also a number of other structures in the immediate vicinity, then a circular one here, which is we're interpreting as a possible hayrick or poultry house. There was also a barn with an animal pen at the opposite end of the site from the cottage. And we found also evidence of a sheepfold or a stockade, and as well on the site there was an area which we're thinking might be some kind of workshop. So overall, this farmstead was very well planned, and its buildings were based on models imported from England. And landscape too is possibly unique amongst Irish sites in that it has such a concentration and number of buildings remaining evident. And it is a very rare remnant of where the ordinary people would have been living at the time. The artefact assemblage from the site consisted overwhelmingly of ceramic vessels, and these were mainly locally made Leinster cookingware and Wexford type pots. So we found lots of dozens of sherds of broken pottery, which some of them could be reconstructed and examined by specialists. And there was evidence for cooking pots, storage vessels, and tableware. But there was also, more unusually, in an Irish site, evidence for cresset lamps, which are those, the middle and the further photo there, which was very rare finds to find ceramic cresset lamps on sites like this. And there was a small number of metal objects, such as an iron knife and a barrel padlock key, sorry. So I think it's really fascinating to picture these objects being used in the kitchen table of a farming family around 600 years ago. And with the discoveries of the farmhouses at Rhinelane and Landscape, we can for the first time trace the developments of agriculture in the area over thousands of years. And I think this gives us a new appreciation of how integral farming is to the fabric of society in the area. So that was just a very brief look at a few of the highlights of the book. I just want to acknowledge the great work of James Hession, my colleague who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, and James Eogan of the TII on this book. I think they've really managed to showcase the results of what we found on site, and this will hopefully feed into the heritage offering, which is already really well developed in the New Ross area. So thank you for listening.